just in case any of you fucking morons act as if I'm like walking something back or anything. This has always been my position. So Knowles is engaged in a trans genocide. No. He just talks like someone who, if he had all the power... Michael Knowles nailed it. Did the very... Remember a couple of months ago when I said the whole trans genocide discussion was like a terminally online thing? It looks like enough people have tweeted at Michael Knowles now that he's talking about it on his show. And the excuse he gives for why he's not genocidal, which, by the way, I do think people like Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh do at the very least have like ambitions that could lead to a genocide if they were brought to like a logical conclusion, or have genocidal rhetoric. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that about them. Ugh. Anyway.
Transgender issue, it's all anybody wants to talk about. This transgender issue, it's all anybody wants to talk about.
I wonder why, dude.
In fact, I got in trouble for this issue yesterday.
Did you? Oh, no.
I, your beloved host, whom everybody loves so, I got in trouble for this issue. It was my publicists over at Media Matters. They were working overtime yesterday, publishing multiple articles about the allegedly egregious things I was saying on this show, which I always encourage. I just retweet them when they put those articles.
Now, the things he said on the show was something about how he wants trans people to just stop existing, right? That was basically the thing. Because he didn't think it's real. He just thinks it's this kind of weird choice that people have decided to make, or some like maybe socially contagious, like, yeah, what was it? The socially contagious mental illness dog shit. Yeah.
Out because those articles and videos tend to be the highlights from my show. So I thank them for going through, clipping it out, making it look really nice, and then they put it out into the world. The big issue that they had yesterday, which was then picked up in other media outlets as well, is that I called to ban transgenderism entirely. I made the point that if you want women to have their own bathrooms, if you think women ought to be able to have their own locker rooms and not have to look at gigantic, gross men while little girls are getting changed, if you want any of those things,
golly,
you have to ban transgenderism entirely. It's not enough to say, well, you have to wait until you're 12 or whatever people are saying now. It has to be the whole thing, because
why are they always, it's always 12-year-olds with these guys. They have no fucking idea what's actually happening in the medical system. What would how does he want? Okay.
If men have the right to behave as women and identify as women for the purposes of public life, then women can't have their own spaces. And we as a society cannot have our own standards and norms, and we're not allowed to live according to reality. We have to live according to the delusions of these troubled people. And I think we the people have a right to reality. And I think women have a right to their own spaces. And so that means you got to ban the thing entirely. And oh my goodness, what these people say.
Oh no.
They said that I was calling for the extermination of transgender people. They said I was calling for...
I didn't want to exterminate them. I just wanted them to stop existing. What the f***, Michael Knowles? This is where he's gonna... Oh God, he's so desperately trying to like keep the fucking candle lit on his failed fucking comedian career. Oh no.
For a genocide against... I said, what? I must have missed that part of my show. When did I say that? I don't know how you could have a genocide of transgender people, because genocide refers to genes. It refers to genetics. It refers to biology. And the whole...
It doesn't even just refer to genes. In the fucking original, the guy who coined the term genocide wanted to include like political fucking affiliation or some shit. It was really broad for who it can include, but it also even the UN definition, which is more narrow, still includes like national or national groups, which again are not really genes. But he the way that he's using that argument is it's like the only thing that makes it not a genocide is because is what trans people aren't in the definition. Like, what a fucking horrible defense. That's basically meaning like, yeah, I could commit all these crimes against the group, but it's just not genocide because that group doesn't count as a group that can be genocided. That's so weird. Like, what a dog shit argument. He's not even making it properly. Like, you could just say, if you want to be the Michael Knowles and do the fucking weasel defense, you can just say it's not in the UN definition. Like, gender isn't in the definition. But I mean, it should be. Does that mean if you commit any of the crimes of genocide against a fucking like gay people, it's just not genocide because they're technically not in the definition? That's like a terrible way to say not genocide. Like, yeah, that's really stupid.
The whole point of transgenderism is that it has nothing to do with biology. That's what the transgender activists say. They say, forget about biological sex. My gender expression doesn't have to have anything to do with my biological sex. Okay, well then there can't be a genocide. That refers to genetics. But furthermore, nobody's calling to exterminate.
Does this guy not think, does this guy not describe what's happening in China as a genocide then? Because I don't know if, like, Uyghur is an ethnic group, but it's also, like, religious. What they're doing is trying to convert them from their religion, right? Like, it's like a cultural change.
Terminate anybody. Because the other problem with that statement is that transgender people is not a real ontological category.
Oh.
It's not a legitimate category of being. There are people who think that they're the wrong sex, but they're mistaken. They're laboring under a delusion. And so we need to correct that delusion. People said, well, what does it mean?
Jesus Christ. Like, this is the thing, is that in this guy's world, if you were trans, like, you would just get, like, forcibly converted, like, forcible conversion therapy, which would be a form of at least cultural genocide, if not, like, genocide. Yeah, like.
To ban transgenderism entirely. Well, it means that we return to the way that American society operated until approximately 5 minutes ago, when we said that men do not have a right to present themselves as women in public life, and women don't have a right to present themselves as men in public life. You have some limits on that. We have all sorts of limits on our speech and behavior. If I wanted to right now, if the spirit moved me and I wanted to go streaking naked through the streets of Nashville, I would not be allowed to do that. That would be against the law. It might be my expression, but I don't have a right to that kind of free expression. There are all sorts of words that I might want to yell and scream and say that I'm not allowed to yell and scream and say, both because of the mores and standards and norms.
The thing is, when people try to say, like, that you just can't, that because I've heard this argument before, actually. I don't remember where, but I've heard the argument that, like, you can't, like, what they're doing is, like, very different from genocide because conservatives, and this is the argument I've made for a while, is that, like, conservatives don't think, or at least this is my observation about them, is that conservatives just don't think being trans is real. They just don't think it's a thing. They don't think it's an immutable characteristic that just is embedded in someone. They think it's just some, like, dumb shit that people made up on the fucking left, and people just adopt it like a hobby, right? Like a fashion trend. That's what they think. The problem is that if your rationale is different from, say, the way that, like, Nazis saw Jews, because Nazis did think Jews were real. They thought Jewish was like a genetic, like it was a race. They were a real, physically real race that he wanted to eradicate. So, but the point of genocide isn't why you do it. It's the acts that you commit. That's what makes it genocide. It's an action. It's a crime. So if you target a specific group and either try to forcibly convert them or forcibly sterilize them or try to kill them, then, which is what the acts of genocide would be, or cultural, like, that would be, I don't think it matters why you did it, so long as you were trying to do it and you were intending to do it. And he has displayed quite clearly some kind of intent. Now, intentions and concrete plans and actions are different things. He hasn't planned a genocide. He doesn't have the power to commit a genocide. He hasn't committed a genocide yet, but he is advocating for like a standard that would lead you to that. So, sorry, just as well in case. Just in case any of you fucking morons act as if I'm like walking something back or anything. This has always been my position. Because every now and then it still happens. I get like an @ or a DM on Twitter with someone sending me like this video or some similar thing and be like, "Oh, are you ready to call it genocide now, Mr. Lord of Buck?" Like, no. This is what I said like back in November, December, I can't even remember now. However unlikely I think it is, I do not disagree with the current situation, in particular the rhetoric and political ambitions of various pundits and legislators could lead to a genocide in the future. I said as much in my first stream. Yeah, like I've never denied that people like this clearly have thoughts and ideas and like rhetoric that is quite genocidal. But the difference between that and saying a genocide is currently happening is like saying you could go to fucking like 1903 Germany and find a bunch of quotes from crazy fucks and say that this is a genocide. That's not the same as like concrete plans and actions. So yeah. I agree with you back then when you said it, but I think we've crossed the line with the laws being passed. No, none of those laws are like acts of genocide. No. Not by current definitions anyway. They're bad and they're incredibly discriminatory and they're hateful and they're abusive and they're human rights violations, but they're not acts of genocide. I still think there's value in keeping that word as the worst of all crimes because that's what it was coined to do. That's how it's always been practiced. Because if we ever get to a stage, this is actually really important. If we ever get to a stage where Michael Knowles does get what he wants, or what he seems to want, which is that trans people by default are just fucking like dragged out against their will to conversion therapy centers that are like run by the state. If we ever get to that kind of position where it's like what's happening to the Uyghurs in China, right? If we ever get to that position, that will be a genocide, at least of some kind. At least if not a genocide, then a cultural genocide. But if we've already been saying that for what's happening now, then kind of loses its sting. You have to acknowledge that things could be a lot worse. And they are like at that stage in several other countries, right? Like there are countries in the world where you can get killed for just being LGBT. Like that's the penalty. That's in law. Like if you're LGBT, they'll just kill you. So
in our culture, but also because of the law. And transgenderism ultimately is a lie. It's a deception. It's a fraud. Fraud is not protected by the First Amendment. Fraud is not a category protected by the principles of free speech. You have no right to fraud.
Wow.
So if you're a man and you dress up like a woman and you rename yourself Sally, you have no right to go to the gym and go into the women's locker room and say, no, I'm really a woman. That's a fraud. And you have no right to that. So banning transgenderism, what that would mean is telling people who are a little confused that they need to get psychological help, that they probably need to get a little bit of spiritual help, and they need to be normal. Be normal. I think that's my main political message.
I ask out of good faith, but aren't discriminatory laws that single out a specific demographic part of the step-by-step process of a genocide? Yes and no. So if you look, because this is, if you're referring to, it's amazing how I don't get bored of explaining this. Just because there are things that happen before a genocide is possible doesn't make those steps a genocide. You could actually say that the beginning of a genocide isn't even policy. The beginning of a genocide is just discrimination, hatred. But you wouldn't say that every group that experienced hatred is being genocided. And you can even see in the 10 stages of genocide where they lay this out. You notice how they don't even call it genocide until here, right? Perpetrators plan the genocide at stage 7. So these things can lead to genocide, but they don't necessarily, they won't, it's not like they always do. In fact, I would argue that most groups that experience these never get to this. And that's a that's a good thing. Like, but that's what the whole point of laying out these steps is to again, it's like, what is it? Halt the stages and stop genocide before it happens. Like the language is very clear here, and if you read the original essay by Stanton, it's like it's the same idea. And actually, if you look at the example here for planning the genocide, they use the final solution. So according to this guy, the Nuremberg laws are not an act of genocide. The boycotts of the Jews are not an act of genocide. The targeting Jews specifically to drag them into concentration camps after Kristallnacht weren't the genocide. The genocide was the plan to kill them, because genocide is killing. It's killing or biological destruction, which would be like forcibly sterilizing. And if you want to say cultural, it would be like forcibly like cultural cleansing or whatever the fuck, which is a much more ambiguous term, but usually it refers to like conversion therapy centers and like again like forcing people into a space and like torturing their identity out of them, like what they do with the Uyghurs, or like what they did with residential schools, or like they do with reserves in Australia to the indigenous population there. So, but discriminatory laws in and of themselves don't make a genocide. They just make something that could become a genocide. Yeah.
Message these days. How far right-wing is that? It's so extremist, isn't it? No, it's the most moderate position you can have. Be normal, okay?
Jesus Christ.
Society has a right to standards and norms. And people don't have a right to just do it whatever they want all the time. If you are a man, you have an obligation to behave basically like a man. And if you're a woman, you have an obligation to behave basically like a woman.
Jesus.
And I'm not saying there aren't tomboys, and I'm not saying there aren't foppish men, but you do not have a right to express your personality or your gender expression in any way that you want.
You see the way that they talk about it, though, like because again, it's this idea. Yeah, this is like a very good glimpse, unfortunately, into the conservative mindset, is that they think a lot, or I don't even know if that, because I always thought conservatives who are maybe, I guess, a bit less crazy than Michael Knowles would say that being trans is more like being gay, like it's immutable. It's just maybe they would argue about what you do about it. I thought that would be like a more, but that's more like trans medicalist. That's maybe, but yeah, conservatives don't really think it's, and I think it's much more common now, is that, yeah, they just don't think being trans is real. They just think it's like a social fad, that it's people just doing their gender expression, right? Like it's as arbitrary as choosing to, like, they think transness is when you like put on nail polish and wear a dress and then you become the other gender. And that's what they think the trans ideology is. They think it's all a choice. Same as they used to think with gay people as well, or a lot of them still do.
That's what banning transgenderism looks like. And by the way, that's how our society operated for pretty much all of its history. All the way down to cross-dressing laws. There were laws against men wearing dresses in public in many places around this country, including San Francisco. That's normal, okay? And it didn't violate the First Amendment, and it didn't violate religious expression. It actually just upheld reality. And it forced people to bring their vision of the world.
Do you not think there's an aspect of social contagion? For people who are trans, no. I don't think social contagion can make someone trans. I think social contagion might make some very young people on Twitter think they're trans. Like maybe. I've like from my experience, I've heard of people like actually I've heard this mostly from trans people. Like trans people who I've met in real like normie trans people I've met in real life, and how they'll go into they'll find a trans space either in university or just like, I don't know, some support group or whatever the fuck, I don't know what it is. Like they'll find a trans space, but they go there and like 99% of the people there, or almost everyone else there, is someone who is like cis presenting almost completely. Like you wouldn't tell. But they call themselves like trans mask or non-binary or like xenogender or some shit. So that probably is a little bit alienating. Because the experience is very different. Or there's tensions there, I guess, like the people who want to be gendered by default versus the people who want to be asked for their gender all the time. The she-they menace was huge in my HS and uni. It's hellish. The she-they menace. Jesus Christ. Is this the, wait, are you, sorry, should I even ask? Are you trans? This only works if you're trans, what I was about to say. Is this the fucking binary trans people genociding the she-theys now? Fuck me. The she-they menace. God. I mean, like, most people I've known in real life who use she-they are cis. That's like a cis thing, but they call themselves cis. Although I guess maybe, like, I don't know. Fuck, we're getting derailed.
The world a little more closely in line with reality. But these days, if you suggest anything of the kind, you're called a fascist, an extremist, and a genocidal maniac murderer. And the reason they do that is because if they call you any of those things, a Nazi, a fascist, a murderer, you're calling for genocide, it allows them to justify violence against you and death threats and all the rest of it. So,
ooh. Oh, Michael Knowles been using the loner box arguments at the end there. He's been watching. Okay, what kind of discourse do we have around here? Did you see the trailer for the horror movie called They Them? No? What? Cis people don't choose their gender. Hey, trans woman here didn't choose my gender, tried to live as a man for 30 years and was shit at it, so much happier now. Well, I'm happy for you. We need a term for TERF, but for trans people that don't suffer gender dysphoria. God, I guarantee you this community has all kinds of varying views on fucking trans people, especially when it comes to like the non-binary stuff. Jesus. What is this?
It's a great day to be alive, isn't it?
So Knowles is engaged in a trans genocide. No. He just talks like someone who, if he had all the power, would probably commit a genocide. Yeah. Yeah, I think I can say that quite comfortably. Do people who don't believe in xenogenders agree with the statement, there are only two genders by that definition? And where the most people... No, I don't think... I think most people see xenogenders as just as a kind of non-binary, right? I don't know. I don't know how most people see xenogenders. Because it is technically not binary. It's also just that it is outside the binary. Seen as the third gender? No, it's seen as the infinite gender. That's what it's seen as. It's seen as the oh. The omnigender. Yeah, that's it. We'll call it that. What's this? Destiny subreddit. Oh yeah, I heard they were both Vosh and Destiny. Wait, what? World's first VTuber to be bullied into retirement for wanting to play a wizard game. Oh no. Let's leave that one for a second. Let's see. Sticking to the Michael Knowles thing. Let's stick to the Michael Knowles thing, guys. Go on, let's stay focused. Like, subscribe, donate. We're gonna focus. Focus the fuck. All right. I want to see what's happening with how the Vosh and the Destiny subreddits have responded to this Michael Knowles fucking genocide shit. Who should we start with? Because I know both of these subreddits had interesting conversations about it, but I don't know what they said. I was just told. I think I probably won't agree with either of them. I imagine the Destiny community will be more on the side of this isn't like this is bad, but it's not a genocide. But they'll also, I feel like with the Destiny community, they're always a lot more the problem of the problem people run into, I think, when they start with like, it's when they see all the people left is saying it's a genocide, is they want to be like contrarian almost. And it's like, you can still acknowledge how bad it is and how real all the policies are without saying it's a genocide. But what sometimes happens is someone will say there's a genocide, someone will say there's not, and then they'll say, whoa, what about this policy, this really bad policy? And then they can be like, you should just be like, it's really, yeah, that's a really horrible policy. It's like it's just not genocide. But people will like see that policy and they'll try to like downplay it and shit. So I think maybe that sometimes happens. I don't know. Let's see. And I think the Vosh community will just be talking about getting guns. I don't know. Or Weimar Germany. That's probably the two things in the. Or they'll probably talk about me as well. I don't know. Is that Loner Box piece of shit ready to call it genocide yet? Let's see. Michael Knowles 5-head tactics. It's impossible to genocide trans people because genocide requires trans people to actually exist. What a stupid argument. Ugh. All right. Unless my memory fails me, isn't this something that Destiny's mentioned on stream? That there are people on the right who laugh at genocide talk because they refuse to accept the existence of trans people in the first place. Exactly. It's like expecting a pro-choice advocate to seriously contend with... Did Destiny make that argument? That would be kind of silly if he did. It's like expecting a pro-choice advocate to contend with the allegations that they're enabling a genocide against the unborn when they don't even view fetuses as people, being unborn as a valid ontological category for people. This is an excellent comparison, although it was better before the edit. That's not a good argument. That's not a good argument at all. If someone who is committing genocide thinks the group doesn't exist, but they're still committing the crime to a group that does exist, if you just deny the group exists while you're doing it, why does that stop the act from being genocide? Unfortunately, if you are pro-life, you would think abortions are genocide against fetuses. You would think that. But it's not that the people who are going for trans stuff don't think trans people aren't people. They just think the trans identity isn't real. So the acts that they would commit to try and get that identity out of trans people were like the forced conversion. That's still the act of genocide that's like separate from the thing with the abortion stuff. So it's not really, I don't think that's a really good comparison. Yeah. Oh, here, conservatives are not arguing trans people are not human. Yeah. Plenty of dehumanizing. Abortion argument. Does this mean that back in the days of racial slavery in America, if enough white people argued that black people weren't people, it means a genocide against black people would be impossible? God, they're all like him, aren't they? The fucking debate. The debate, bro. Go, go. What an excellent point from Mustafa Kadim. Kadim? I don't know. Couldn't any authoritarian government get to avoid being called genocidal just by saying they didn't believe in the existence of the group they were genociding? Yeah, like if you're gonna call something that's why I keep stressing, like the reason you call it a genocide is because of the act. The act is either an act of genocide or it's not. Like I'm sure people in Uganda who kill people for being gay probably don't think being gay is real. They probably think it's like a lifestyle choice that people make. You could still say they're committing genocide though. I don't know. Good healthy discourse here. Who got downvoted? Basic bitch comparisons. Okay. Dear liberals, how can I be killing gay people if gay people aren't real? Yeah, well. I don't think conservatives really care about the treatment of dysphoria for adults. It's a treatment, well, a lot of conservatives, but like people like Michael Knowles and a lot of them actually do want to target adults as well. They want it out of adults too. That's true. They do. I don't know if that's most of them. I would love to see polling on that actually, about where Republicans sit on trans adults. I know they all probably hate the idea of trans youth, but for trans over 18s, I wonder where they stand on that. Because I'd imagine some of them at least are okay with it. I don't know. Mentally ill degenerates. The worst part is that it's such a silly argument. Surely if you don't believe the thing being trans is real, you must recognize the class that believes to be identified. Yeah, the people. Yeah, okay. Okay. He doesn't think trans people are inhuman. He thinks they're cis. Okay, they're just arguing about like I think most people think the Knowles argument is dumb, right? Seems to be the case. Oh yeah, like genocide is because of genes. That's so stupid. That is like no understanding of where the term genocide like comes from, or even how it's used after it's narrowed. Didn't Destiny agree with this a couple of weeks ago? He said it may not even be possible for conservatives to genocide trans vote because they disagree that they're a distinct demographic. I would be very surprised if Destiny said that. If he did, that's very dumb. Extremely rare TGG not being genocidal maniacs. Jesus Christ. Used to have sex with a lot of trans people who have a midlife crisis, and they're the most sexually degenerate people. They're into weird shit, even illegal shit. It was kind of hot. Like, God. Well, downvoted. Obliterated. What the fuck? What's his solution? ECT. Okay. Well, that's DGG being debate bros, coming up with the sick analogies, the sick ass hypotheticals. We talked about slavery. Okay, cool. What's the Vosh Reddit saying about it? Oh, Vosh tweeted. What did he tweet? I guess this is his response to Michael Knowles' tweet. Nazis. Oh no. Let's find out. Vaush. See if I can find it. Has Vosh been posting porn? I hope he hasn't. Okay. It's not possible to commit a genocide against this group of people because they are not a real group of people is maybe the most unambiguously genocidal rhetoric I've heard yet. Jesus fucking Christ. It's not just bad, it's textbook bad. Attacks on the validity of a demographic category are almost always used by governments to handwave accusations of ongoing or impending genocide. The Nazis did it with the Jews, Romani, disabled, and homosexuals, and trans people. No, they didn't. The Nazis thought the Jews were a distinct race of people. That's a bit different from what Michael Knowles is saying. Yeah, he thought they were like a distinct subhuman race of people. Yeah. That's not really the same argument. Like, is this same with Romani, disabled, and I don't know what they thought about homosexuals, but no, they thought it was. Yeah, they thought that those groups were very. He thought those groups were like actually almost more real than they actually were because he thought it was like the racial essentialism, right? Like. Same with disabled people. Well, yeah, he thought it was like an abomination, like a genetic abomination. Of course, he thought it was real. Yeah. Michael Knowles' thing is similar to the China Uyghur thing. Although even then, I think Chinese people would say being Uyghurs, like the Chinese people would think that because Uyghurs are not just a religious group, they're also a ethnic group as well. I don't know why. I don't know why he does this. It's like I guess it's just that like is it presentism where you try to shoehorn the events of today into the past so you can compare it to Nazis? Like you can absolutely say that the approach conservatives take to trans people is different from the way Nazis are with Jews, right? It's very different because Michael Knowles thinks trans people are just cis with like some delusion that can probably be cured by some like conversion or whatever. Nazis thought Jews were like this immutably racially fucking like inferior group. There was no fixing the Jew. Like there was just it was either get rid of them or eventually kill them. Like that was it. Yeah, I don't know. That was it's maybe not very accurate. Buy firearms and train yourself in their use. Okay. Join local advocacy groups and befriend your neighbors. That's good advice. Be careful with the personal information you post online. Maintain and update. This is so depressing that this is like a thing that people have to use, like have to think about, especially like if you're in a red state, even a purple state. Actually, I'm pretty sure a lot of the legislation is finding a way through. And be more ready to live than they are to kill. My. Whoa. Oh damn. We're trying to see the good in people in things now. I believe in most of this. Even this is like, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing this in America. Like it's, yeah. I don't think he's telling people to go out and do shit now. This Nazi thing is silly though. Looks like we've potentially heard silly arguments from both Vaush and Dustin today. Okay. Does anyone know where Destiny said that? Or if people are saying he made the same argument as Michael Knowles, which I think is very unlikely. Possible though. I don't know. What's the Reddit saying? Violence. Doubt their intentions. Neighborhood knows and cares about you. Arm ourselves. Be loud. Thinking of taking away our right to transition. How about taste my bullets? Make them afraid. Make them think twice about shooting up another gay club. Okay. Trans people are being systematically dehumanized and scapegoated on scale not seen since the 30s. Hate guns. Guns. In the event you need to use the gun. Guns. God, that's a long one. I ain't reading all that. I wish Vosh would talk more about alternatives if people don't want to own guns. I'm just saying, guys, like, if you want to arm yourself and in America and just in case some bad shit happens, like, it makes sense. But if you're going out and like saying what, like taking away our right to transition, taste our bullets, and like someone in my fucking Discord earlier today was saying that if they kill a fucking Republican legislator, it'll like make them scared to legislate against trans people. Mate, no, it fucking won't. You really think that there was ever a time, like anywhere in any place, where if you imagine, like, if you want to make the 1920s comparisons, if a bunch of, or even early 30s, if a bunch of fucking Jews started killing like Nazi politicians in the streets and shit, like, you think that would like make people scared to engage in anti-Semitism? People would just be suddenly like, oh, I don't know, like, I think these Jewish people, turns out maybe we shouldn't like worry about them destroying the fucking Aryan race, like after they've killed people. Jesus Christ. Is that what someone actually thinks? Yeah, they were going to talk to me about it, but they decided not to today. And that is, it's really scary that mindset is moving around now, that we're at a stage now where killing legislators would be acceptable to some people. And I'm like, fuck me. And I just like, I just wish there was like a ghost of fucking Christmas past that could come in and just show them what would happen the day after, what the media would be doing, what the voters, the swing voters would be doing, what the fucking rhetoric from the Republicans would be like after that happens. Like, fuck me. What the Proud Boys and the militants might do, like, or whatever. Local militia, Michael Knowles. You people have to get offline and stop peddling this Civil War nonsense. It's such a chronically online take and shows you don't actually have any friends in real life with dissenting opinions. Oh no, that's a big downvote. Wow. I wish there was a better way we can advocate for staying strong and fighting back that doesn't involve putting firearms in the hands of people at the risk of suicide. The whole buy guns rhetoric could backfire in that way, plus it sounds kind of LARPy. Downvoted 35 times. Who cares if it sounds LARPy? Think we're beyond that point. If you have large groups of right-wingers putting out genocidal rhetoric who've been organizing themselves into militias for years, with no shortage of firearms, it's not exactly LARPy to organize and prepare to defend yourself in response. If you're at risk of suicide, you have to store a firearm. The time to LARP has passed. Oh no. Golly. Vosh doesn't want you to buy a gun if you may use it to kill yourself. Good advice. Oh. Name something that can stop the brown shirts besides being armed. The brown shirts should have been outlawed. The reason they weren't, and the reason a lot of Nazis were not dealt with by the legal system appropriately at all, was because the Weimar civil service and a lot of the Weimar judiciary were sympathizers. They were Nazi sympathizers. They just liked it. You should see. I go over it one day was Hitler's trial for the beer hall putsch, which the brown shirts were involved in as well, where the judge just like allowed him to bulldoze the people who were questioning him, and they allowed him to like just bully witnesses, and they allowed him to gish gallop and monologue and preach to the fucking court. Like, and then, yeah, they gave him what, like a 5-year sentence in jail, and he got out, and they even recommended that he'd be up for parole in 9 months. Like, that's one thing that could have definitely happened to the brown shirts, was they should have been dealt with by the system, but the system was just like way too pro-conservative. I don't really know how valuable. Like, there was a lot of street violence as well. It's not like there weren't. Like, the Social Democrats had the Reichsbanner, who were their militants. The KPD had militants fighting with brown shirts. It didn't really, again, like the state and the entire, like, so much of the foundations of the Weimar state, like the judiciary and the police, the military, the civil service, were so conservative leaning, and they were so full of people who just like were just against the Republic in general, that when the time came for the street violence between communists and Nazis, or Social Democrats and Nazis, it was like the Nazis had all the support. But yeah, the brown shirts were banned a few times. It's just that those bans were lifted because the nationalist contingent of the Weimar Republic was just like so sympathetic to them. But yeah. You know brown shirt history. How did German Communist Party gang war versus Nazis turn out? Maybe they didn't gang war hard enough. Maybe that's just pressing fast forward, if it's the only strategy. It's also like the Proud, like there is no, like the Proud Boys are not a good analogy for brown shirts. Like, brown shirts were so much fucking worse right from the get-go. It was all like, or the Free Corps as well. It was all like ex-military people as well from the First World War, just like roaming the streets and trashing people's meetings, and like yeah, the violence in Weimar Germany was fucking insane. Like, every year there were like double digits or triple digits of people who were killed in like political fights. It was so common. I found Destiny's comment. Yeah, you can link it. There's a lot to learn under preventing violent extremism and peace building. Some good orgs doing good work, even plenty of US military academy literature right now, having learned that just shooting does not make the terrorism problem go away. At the very least, you'd want as much of the community as possible thinking brown shirts are bad. And we can get there with solidarity organization, cooperation, community services, education, rehabs, mental health care. Sounds like a lot. We have, okay, just policy. 2/3 of gun deaths are suicide. We're not in a vacuum. Right-wing protests. Gang wars. More gang wars, state crackdowns, weak Dems lose elections to hard right warlords who promise to restore order. That's very true. So we do a lot better with some majority of the community. They don't have to be Marxist to be anti-right-wing gangs shooting people. Fox News. -5. Damn. Is the IRA an example of political violence working? Probably, yeah. I don't know the history of the IRA well enough to say that, but like, I mean, there are a million incidents of political violence working. The Jewish partisan militias were an example of political violence working. They saved a lot of people, and they made the Holocaust, like, they at least slowed the process down. They destroyed a lot of supply lines and infrastructure that made the Holocaust like harder to carry out. Killed a lot of officials. as long as you can justify, like explain A to B why the violence makes sense and why it works, you can do that. But this just like, as soon as people just start vaguely gesturing to like, oh, it's all violence. Like the violence already begun when they took away the healthcare from the kids. It's like, that's not really concretely explaining why the violence works. And there's a reason it's not. Like there's a reason people, like if anyone ever does that, just keep asking them like, why? Why does the violence work? Like A to B, not platitudes, just A to B. Because then you'll get the fucking retarded statements like, sorry. You'll get the statements like, oh, it'll scare politicians into stopping anti-trans legislation. That's where you'll get. Can you briefly explain? Can you briefly explain what a brown shirt is? Sorry. A brown shirt was like it was the SA. It was like the fucking gangsters, the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party. They wore brown shirts. They were notoriously disorganized. They were also where the Strasserites, like the socialistic, like the National Socialists who wanted to put the socialism and National Socialists came from as well. Actually, you know where the SA, the brown shirts got a lot of their recruits from, incidentally. If you want to draw analogies, where the SA got a lot of their recruits from, especially towards the late 20s, early 30s, was from the Communist Party. The Communist Party in Germany was not they weren't like theory heads. They weren't very well versed in Marxist theory and like nuance, or they weren't like intellectuals. Even Thalmann wasn't really. But like a lot of their speeches and a lot of their rhetoric was just all, again, it was like the Nazis. It was all very colorful and very emotive and very captivating to like a desperate kind of crowd. But the thing with the KPD is, because they were Soviet funded, they were like Soviet backed, was they had a few principles. One, they were anti-Weimar. They were against the Republic. Two, they were very paramilitary oriented. They had a lot of fighting. They loved fighting. Three, they were anti-democracy. Four, their biggest enemy was the Social Democrats, because the Social Democrats were the biggest defenders of of the Weimar Republic. What was I going to say? But the point is that because of those principles, because they were like, they hated the SPD, they hated democracy, they hated the Weimar Republic, they hated, they loved violence. That actually put them in a position where a lot of the fighters who got disillusioned with the KPD, especially towards the end of the 20s and the early 30s, they defected to join the Nazis. They were called the beefsteak Nazis. It was especially the wing of the Strasserite wing of the brown shirts that they joined, because the Strasserites, again, they were like, they were big proponents of the idea of like putting the socialism into National Socialism. They had very like left-leaning messaging, or they had the aesthetics of left-wing stuff. So it was like a very easy flip over. I think there's a stat from like 1931 or 32, where the KPD had a turnover rate of like 50%, meaning that most of the new members of the KPD, especially the paramilitary wing, were only there for a few months before they left and either joined the SPD or the Nazis, or some other party, whatever. And there's this huge myth that because the KPD were so anti-law and so anti-Weimar and so like down and dirty, was that the reason they were the first ones to get rounded up and killed by the Nazis was because they were the biggest threat to the Nazis. That is complete bullshit, it turns out. I read through a lot of it just a few weeks ago. That is complete horseshit. When the Nazis started consolidating military and police power in the early 30s, they actually explicitly put out a message that they would go after the KPD and the SPD alike. So even before the Enabling Act was passed, and people were being rounded up into Dachau, the concentration camp, and when political opponents were being arrested and killed, SPD people were arrested as well. SPD councillors were murdered before the Enabling Act was passed. There were murders, there were kidnappings, there were buildings, like office buildings and party buildings burnt down. There were several municipalities where they were just completely dissolved. The Prussian Landtag was dissolved. So the reason they went a bit harder on the KPD at that point was because they were easier targets. They didn't have, they were literally a foreign-backed party from the Soviets. So this idea that the KPD were like the bigger threat to the Nazis because they were more willing to break the law and shit like that, or whatever the fuck people say, it's actually horseshit. The SPD and the Reichsbanner were treated like the same by the Nazis. It's just that by the time the Enabling Act was passed, there were still SPD members in the Reichstag because they just had a bit more protection than the KPD did. It wasn't that the Nazis were less scared, were less bothered by them. The SPD were the only ones who were present in the Reichstag to vote against the Enabling Act, which they did. But yeah, that was a myth I'd heard for a long time, was that the KPD were like the ultimate warriors and the SPD were all just like, oh no, the Nazis are in, it's the law now. Like we're too like fucking beta to fight that. No, that's horseshit. Turns out it's total bullshit. Anyway. Said it enough times. So, I don't know. The KPD were the first cucks in politics, enabled the Nazis in a lot of ways, and they were the first to get fucked. Yeah, well. Oh God, there's a quote. If I can find the quote from the KPD in 1931 or 32 of what the party statement was, the Central Committee statement. Oh, fuck. Just here, hang on. It is the most unbelievably cucked shit I've ever seen. Where the fuck is it? I've got so many. This is how many posters I'm going through, by the way. By that logic, the SPD did as much cuckery? No, nowhere near as much as the KPD did. The KPD tried to help the Nazis dissolve the Prussian Landtag, which covered like 60% of the land in Germany and like 20 million voters, because it was run by the SPD. Like, they collaborated to try and dissolve like the SPD's stronghold in Prussia, so they could centralize power and like, yeah, fuck. And helping the Nazis with collaborating during the strike as well. Oh yeah, the Reichstag fire, the fact that it was blamed on the KPD, even though the Nazis explicitly said that they would come for both parties equally. What's this bit? This is a quote as well, wasn't it? Yeah, the Nazi press, when they opened Dachau, the concentration camp, the first one, they actually said, they printed that it was for all communist and, where necessary, Reichsbanner and Social Democrat officials. So they were very open about the fact that they weren't discriminating. But where is that KPD quote? The ultimate cuck quote. The one that has been a bit mangled over time. Oh yeah. This is the worst fucking thing. This is from 1st of April, 1933. Where the KPD were talking about the Nazis coming in only to get met with a German October. They thought if the Nazis got in and assumed full power in early 1933, they said by October there would be a fucking communist revolution. And yeah, in 1933, it was the Executive Committee of the Comintern, and this was their resolution. This is what they said. They said, despite the fascist terror, the revolutionary upturn in Germany will inexorably grow. The masses' defense against fascism will inexorably grow. The establishment of an openly fascist dictatorship which has shattered every democratic illusion in the masses and is liberating the masses from the influence of the Social Democrats is accelerating the tempo of Germany's development towards a proletarian revolution. And they held that until June. In June, they even said that Hitler would soon collapse and pave the way for the victory of Bolshevism in Germany. That's the fucking cuck. Like, that's the cope and seethe. Like, how many key words are there in that? Will shatter the democratic illusion in the masses, liberate the masses from the Social Democrats, accelerating. Like, it's everything. Accelerationism, Tankie fucking morons focusing all their energy against like left, like the furthest left leaning liberals. And like, oh God. It's the funniest quote I've ever read in my fucking life. Anyway, huge cope and seethe from the KPD. Anyway, that was a long Jenna segment. God, imagine what the Destiny Vosh debate would be on this. Is there a conflict to hash out? Kind of. Destiny doesn't think it's a genocide, and Vosh does. That's the debate. I don't know. I mean, actually, I don't even know if Vosh is as. He's actually not as wild on it as the people in his community seem to be. Like, when he was reviewing David Pakman's take on it, he was kind of saying there's not really anything wrong with what Pakman was saying. Like, I don't think he's as fussed about it as like the Demon Mama types are. Like, yeah. He did want to talk to me about it at one point, but then he said he got busy, so. Hey. Destiny reacted to that, did he? People are arguing about it in Discord as well. It is a very, like, as long as people, I think as people agree on the solutions, like, stop legislation, keep Republicans out, lobby, support trans rights groups, like, as long as that's like your basic gist, and you're not saying to kill lawmakers to scare them into stopping the legislation, you're probably fine. Oh, someone had a clip of Destiny's statement on this. Yeah, where the fuck is it? Sorry. It was you. It was Teeny Wren. Shit. I remember. Where the fuck is it? Oh, gotcha.
Colloquially, and I know, Casey, you're not trying to gotcha me, right? Just like,
Gotcha.
Honest question: at what point would you be concerned about trans people being genocided? Is it the first kill? Here's the issue with calling a trans genocide a trans genocide is that a lot of conservatives don't think trans people are real. So it's like fundamentally a different type of engagement. Like a genocide is like there's a group of people that all of us acknowledge as existing, and we want to eliminate this group of people. We want to eliminate the Uyghurs. We want to eliminate the Jews. We want to, like, there's a group of people and we need to get rid of all of them. We want to kill them. And I think that's fundamentally a different type of question than like, I don't believe that transness is a real thing and it's like poisoning our children and we need to like stop not to say that like that's good, that the end thing is good, but it's a different type of thing. And that's why I think that calling it a genocide is just strange when people don't even all agree that trans people are even real things. And to label it a genocide is just a little silly, I think. It misses the point of what's happening.
speaking colloquially,
I think, I mean, he's like, if you took that last sentence, I think it's right. But the earlier bit is a weird rationale. I think it's maybe because I think it's because Destiny doesn't think cultural genocide is real. Because if you say that conservatives believe being trans is like a mental illness and that it's like it's this not real thing that we just need to culturally fucking keep in check or whatever, that's like, then that wouldn't lead you to killing. It wouldn't. It would lead you to doing things that get them killed, like, but that's not what you're intending to do, right? You'd be like intending to convert and all that. But I don't know, like, does he I would wonder if he thinks like forced conversion therapy would be like an act of genocide, because by the UN definition it's not. By the most commonly held definition it's not. If he doesn't think the cultural genocide is real, does he not think the Uyghur genocide is real? The Uyghur genocide is real by international law because of the sterilizations. That's biological destruction. But that is ironic, because is that clip is older than the, yeah, it's 8 days ago. That clip from Dustin is older than the Michael Knowles one. How would you define trans genocide? Like, I personally think there needs to be a distinction between cultural and just genocide. I really wish cultural genocide just had a different word, because there has to be a very fundamentally like meaningful difference between killing a group, or at least trying to biologically eradicate them with sterilizations, like forced sterilization. There has to be a difference between that and like the cultural thing of just trying to erase it through I don't know, like demolishing mosques or moving families into the houses and shit. Like, I feel like those are very different crimes. And the engagement is like a little bit different as well. So, however, whilst cultural genocide is, I think it exists enough in common parlance for it to be a thing, like recognized. I think a transcultural genocide would look like the equivalent of a residential school system kind of thing, but with conversion therapy, like instead of what they did in the residential schools. But I think that act of like actually fully intentionally and in an organized way, like seizing people physically to do that, to like get the culture out of them, I think that's like the level that makes it like genocide, rather than like cultural erasure or like human rights abuses or discrimination, right? Like, I think that's different, because again, the whole point of genocide is that it's the worst of all crimes. It's like the worst thing you can do to a group. That's why I don't like passing off these things as like saying to kids that you can't get puberty blockers until you're 18. And it's like, that's a really horrible policy to push through. And it's anti-scientific, it's abusive. But I don't see that in the same way. Like, I don't view that in the same umbrella as like an act of genocide, right? Because again, genocide is the worst crime. It's like, it's higher up in international crimes than like war crimes, you know? So to say that taking puberty blockers away from teenagers is worse than a war crime, right? Or worse than a crime against humanity, like what happened in Bucha, like the Bucha massacre. Or worse than a crime of aggression, like invading a country. Yeah, I just find it strange. But then the people who make the trans genocide argument will say they don't really care about definitions of words, or they don't care like about the ancient. They would rather change it. And like, okay, but you know, you live in a world where we have an international definition of a crime that is enforceable. the only definition that's enforceable. We have a common understanding of it. It's like, why are you trying to like, is it really worth the effort of trying to change that in people? And like, why? As long as the outcome and intent is there, what does it matter if Republicans deny that they even exist? I think the fact that they deny that they exist, that they think it's just like a mental or a social thing, I think that does make it maybe less likely that they would ever intentionally try to fucking kill them en masse, right? Like, I think maybe that's the difference, but it's like, it's whether or not you believe that genocide can exist without killing. And me, I don't really know where I stand on that. At that point, I think it's splitting hairs. But again, the situation, it's not splitting hairs comparing the situation now to an act of genocide. That's not splitting hairs. I think what's happening in the United States right now is still quite a few worlds apart from like a fucking Armenia of trans people or a Holocaust of trans people, right? I think you're still pretty far. Speaking more hypothetically, yeah. What the fuck is estradiol? El Dorado. Wait, what was the oh, it was on my Twitter. Oh, it's estrogen. Oh yeah, okay. Do you consider what Israel is doing a genocide or no? That's a completely different question. I think the term I've mostly leaned towards, particularly with Gaza, is incremental genocide. I think that's the term that like Ilan Pape uses, and like the Electronic Intifada go with that. Like, yeah. Again, and he actually justifies it quite well, because what they have in Gaza in particular is that Israel has so much control over like they have the control over the border, they control the airspace, they control the sea. They control it to the point where they've done this in the past, where they've counted the calories of imports to make sure that people in Gaza got on a certain X amount of calories per day, it was like 1,000 and something. And the minister said that they were going to put Gaza on a diet. That was like a quote. So that's not a genocide, but if push comes to shove and Israel decides that they're just fed up with fucking Gaza and they just want them all to die, they could do it tomorrow. They have everything in place that they could do it. And that's the rationale for calling it like incremental genocide. But again, like not actually genocide happening now, but at least under international law. But yeah, which shows you actually, because Ilan Pape is one of the more radical voices on Palestine. And even he hesitates to call it genocide. He has to put in incremental genocide because, yeah, like again, there's a very good reason we have these differences and we have these nuances with these words. Because if Israel ever does commit like a de facto genocide, it's probably good that we'd be able to have a new word to call it, right? That we'd have apartheid or occupation and all that, or settler colonialism, and then we'd have to step up to genocide, right? Like, it makes sense.